I believe the biggest thing today was that Paul Levesque did a conference call with members of the media to promote the debut on USA and covered a lot of ground in this call. There were a lot of good questions asking pretty much about the future of NXT and how 205 Live and NXT UK are going to be incorporated under the brand. And some notes here. He went over the fact that with the TakeOver specials, they're still in the process of finalizing their schedule, but indicated that Worlds Collide in January, that's not going to be a one-off special, and you will probably see more TakeOver specials be standalone events, similar to what they did this past June with the 25th show in Bridgeport, but also did say that there could be times when TakeOver is a part of a weekend like WrestleMania. So it's really a bit of a challenge to kind of read between the lines with Paul Levesque, because everything is maybe this, maybe that, we could do this, and you kind of have to just get an approximation of the picture he's trying to paint, and you're trying to put a frame around it, if that makes sense.
Well, my feeling is that I feel like a lot of these things that he's being asked, he might not even really know the final answers to.
It could be. He is never going to show too much of his hand here, but I think also he is wise enough that on these calls, he wants to provide enough that he's going to ultimately get stories and coverage out of these. Like, there is a strategy behind these calls specific to wrestling media to get that kind of engagement and to get that kind of coverage as well, or else he wouldn't be doing these. Like, obviously there is a need to do these for Paul Levesque every month.
For sure. And we see, I think, AEW employ very much a similar tactic where, these two companies seem to embrace wrestling media and know really how to use wrestling media to get their word out. Whereas I feel like traditionally we see Vince kind of shy away and maybe have a bit more of an antagonistic relationship with media.
Dude, Vince McMahon doing one of these every month with the wrestling media would be awesome. I think he'd get through one of them. And we'd get a blow up of some sort at someone asking some question. But those would be just absolute must listen to. He goes on to talk here about, first of all, what do you think about that idea? Like, let's, a lot of these are hypotheticals as we went over, but TakeOver remaining a part of WrestleMania weekend. I do feel like TakeOver is a big part of the WWE's WrestleMania weekend. I would be hesitant to take that out if the replacement is the Hall of Fame or something like that.
I agree. I feel like takeovers often have become a highlight of WrestleMania weekends, including above WrestleMania. So not only is it a great time to gain exposure for your new product, those shows have typically become the biggest takeovers of the year as well. So to suddenly pluck those away, not have your own kind of, a supplementary product benefit from that giant audience that's there, and letting ROH take advantage of that? Any indie GCW take advantage of all that?
Yep. Especially ROH. And, it's going to be really interesting to see what kind of role ROH is on WrestleMania weekend next year, and what a contrast year to year that is. Yeah. But, it's a great point. Like, you take TakeOver at a WrestleMania weekend, you are sending minimum, I believe, 5,000 people on a Saturday night to a different destination.
Yeah, so I see them keeping TakeOver around, and not only that, I see them doing more programming that entire weekend. There's really, maybe they'll do a Worlds Collide and a TakeOver and something else on top of that. Like I think we've seen their strategy is to completely inundate the wrestling fans' attention span so that they don't go elsewhere. And to me, TakeOver is really kind of their biggest tool to prevent people from going elsewhere.
He was asked several times about the draft. How would NXT be incorporated? And this one, he pretty much said, this is going to be a Raw and SmackDown affair. NXT is not going to be drafting people. Didn't really comment if, NXT performers could get drafted. And that's one where I don't care what the answer is today. That could always change over the next couple of weeks. And all it's going to take is a decision that we want to pluck this talent. Although I'd look at now, there better be a really strong reason to take a talent from NXT. It's great if you've got an idea like, we're going to take the Undisputed Era and they are going to be the new Shield and they're going to be protected and we've got long-term plans, but they can't afford to be grabbing guys that are just going to be Apollo Crews or Chad Gable, because they need NXT needs to be loaded right now.
or Aleister Black, or the Authors of Pain, or like EC3. Like I just think this year really has shown that. Oh man, like remember Johnny Gargano and Tommaso Ciampa were called up at one point? Like they really felt like they were plucking all these people out just seemingly for no reason, having zero plan for them once they got into the main roster. And that's why we're left with somebody like Aleister Black or the Authors of Pain finally right now perhaps getting a storyline. Aleister Black, I think we're still waiting. So, the draft though is a great time to put a bit of new spotlight on somebody, so I could see them maybe saving that for one particular person. But I definitely wouldn't do the multiple call-ups when they have plenty of people still from NXT who have yet to kind of get their fair shake on the main roster.
What do you think happens with the Street Profits at the draft?
I think they stay in NXT, despite the fact that, they've been so featured on Raw. I think they become a valuable commodity to keep in NXT. At the same time, I mean, they had to run with the titles. They lost them. I mean, you've kind of done your story with them. You know what? Now that I think about it, maybe if you're going to call anybody up, maybe those guys would be it.
Yeah, it just seems that if they have to make a decision on where are these guys going to be slotted, and the fact they're still being featured each week lends me to believe that perhaps they are just going to stay up here. Like they've dedicated, I won't say a lot of time, but there's been a lot of focus on them all summer long.
Yeah.
Anyway, just going through a few more points that were brought up here. They talked about, several people asked about the takeovers potentially being longer in length because of the additional hour each week and having more programs and more people in the mix. And Levesque seems pretty steadfast on the idea of trying to keep the takeovers to the length where people are satisfied and not feeling like they drag on. And that was interesting because that's, a stark contrast to the WWE big shows, but stating that, we don't have to have all our stars on every TakeOver show. And he compared it directly to UFC cards, where each month it's a different buildup and it's different stars on pay-per-views. TakeOvers are not all that different. And there are so few spots at TakeOvers that you have a very hungry locker room that are coveting those spots. And that makes for a very strong locker room that are all trying to fight for those very few spots. So it seems that the 2.5 to 3 hour length of takeovers are kind of what he wants to cap these at.
I mean, I love hearing that. I think that's a huge part of why takeovers have been as consistent as they've been, is because they've been short. They haven't had 5 hours per special to give us filler. There's no time for filler because there's so few shows and those shows aren't very long. So you constantly get high quality. And I'm really glad to hear him reiterate that. Of course, once what we see in execution, once the TV deal starts and maybe, he more influence is put on takeovers, might be different from what he says here. But I'm hoping because it's Triple H, he maintains, most of the control.
Yeah, and it wouldn't surprise me if that is a fight he has had to have in the past, because as everything on the network has been hours consumed, I mean, it just lends you to believe, like, tack on another hour to these takeover specials. They're so popular. And they've been able to maintain the same length for the TV show, for the takeover specials. And I think that has been a positive for them, even though I'm sure there are people that are crunching all the numbers that state all these people would stick around for another hour of takeover. They might complain, it might water down these specials, but they'll watch them. And that's been, I think, more so a creative decision, a philosophical one, and one that does have a value to it, very much so. They've mentioned, this was already mentioned previously, that they're looking at doing 6 takeovers next year, along with 2 NXT UK specials, and said it would be very likely that talent from NXT UK would be shifting over and being featured on the USA Network as well. And then the topic of 205 Live was brought up, and he said that he kept saying they want to create opportunities for the cruiserweights, and threw out the idea that perhaps the Cruiserweight title could be defended on future takeover specials in addition to WWE pay-per-views, which seems kind of counter to the whole thing they're trying to push, that these will be 3 distinct brands and having the Cruiserweights kind of in all over the place. Like, I feel like you have to make your decision, like, where are these guys best served? And I think the Cruiserweights doing their matches in Full Sail will have a much better chance of getting over than the present presentation. He he didn't say one way or another if 205 Live as its own show is what the future is going to be. But again, he did the interview last week talking about the fact that, the cruiserweights could be under that NXT umbrella. And that seems to be the most logical place for these guys.
Yeah, I think so. In a response like that, I think there's a lot of either wishful thinking or maybe dancing around, not knowing what really the plan is going to be yet. My opinion, John. I think they should exist within the NXT quote unquote universe and not mix with, WWE main roster pay-per-views on the kickoffs as much as, exposure as that might give them. The audiences just don't make those matches feel at all special. Whereas we just saw with like Drew Gulak being on an Evolve show, he felt like a superstar. So I'd love to continue to see those, but under the NXT banner.
So those are the main points in the call from Paul Levesque. So it's a very big week for them, and it'll be a very heavily focused upon number on Wednesday. What is your prediction on Wednesday night? The 1 hour from 8 till 9, higher or lower? I'm going to say 700,000 viewers.
I think higher.
Higher?
Yeah.
I think that would be viewed as a success for week 1 if it tops 700,000 viewers.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, then again, there really wasn't that whole lot of promotion for it today. Like maybe the big show is going to be October 4th.
2nd.
Or October 2nd, I mean.
Yeah.
But I'll go over 700.